on. Oh, my closet door is open. I did everything but close the door. You don't need to see the secret wardrobe of nothing. Hello, everyone. In case you don't know, my name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. Welcome back, everyone. After a long holiday, I took off a significant amount of time this year. I was very burnt out. Um, yeah, I took off from, what was it? The 20th, I think. 2 weeks. Friday before Christmas was my last day in the office, and so, yeah, it's been a long holiday season. A lot has happened in the news. A lot has happened today, um, including fun stuff like, Justin Trudeau stepping down in Canada, and, um, and the certification of the election happened today. It's always tough, um, when you are a vice president who ran for an election and lost. You then have the sad, kind of the unglamorous, sad task of certifying your own loss. Election certification was something most people did not even know occurred until 4 years ago, and the coverage today has reflected that. We'll dig into that a little bit later, but a lot has happened just today. um but we're also going to get into the drone thing. We're also going to get into um the great, which is happening kind of on YouTube and influencer circles, the great honey scandal, with the Rose mentioned honey promised to help you find coupon codes and all this type of thing, and oh boy, that it turns out that it actually was doing a great job of usurping links that creators relied upon to be able to make money, sort of thing. And so it was, yeah, it's turned into quite a scandal. Pretty much every major influencer, especially on YouTube, is talking about it, mentioning it, um, all this sort of thing. It's become quite an issue. So it's yeah, that's in fact I was watching yesterday. There's a YouTuber named Mac Does It, and he does sort of comedy and reaction videos and typical old school YouTube stuff. And they'd been a major sponsor of his, and he'd worked with them for years and years and years, and so he had kind of felt a little bit responsible for you know all that has happened, and now there's a lawsuit. In fact, this is how into YouTube it's getting. The Legal Eagle guy, who does the Legal Eagle channel, he's filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of influencers and creators against Honey. That was big news. Everyone's reacting to it. It's totally become a thing. Honey also does a great job of stealing data. It also doesn't really find that many coupon codes. It's basically a data harvesting sort of thing. And yeah, it's all coming out now. The whole sad Tawdry affair is coming out. So that was also news sort of over the break. In kind of business news, before we get into stories and headlines, Honda and Nissan are getting married and possibly also joining a throuple with Mitsubishi. So Nissan news had come out in early December that Nissan only had about 18 months left and needed a buyer sharpish. And Honda is one of the smaller, as compared to Toyota, the smaller Japanese automaker. And so kind of in the middle of Nissan looking for a buyer, it looks like Honda and Nissan are going to be joining forces. The business press definitely says this is much more Honda buying Nissan than sort of an equal partnership, but it will be interesting to see if Mitsubishi gets involved. If all three of them get together, they would be the world's third largest automaker. Which could be quite interesting. Honda makes a much better car than Nissan, so if Honda can improve the Nissan lineup in any meaningful way, it would be significant. A lot of people were wondering why Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi is not big in the American market. It is definitely bigger in international markets, especially in Japan, Asia, elsewhere. And this is just a marriage of Mitsubishi Motors. Mitsubishi, the company, is a Zaibatsu. Um, they're a giant company that does everything from investment banking to heavy manufacturing. Most of the frames for Japanese cars are made by Mitsubishi and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. So it's yeah, it's a lot. Um, and that's kind of a big interesting in automotive news. Speaking of automotive, Japan and steel, it was announced last week that Biden is going to be blocking Nippon Steel, which was a Japanese steel company, their purchase of U.S. steel. Um, Now, a lot of people will say, well, why does that matter? Trump's going to be in office in 2 weeks. It doesn't look like Trump's going to move forward with that deal either. And so steelworker, U.S. Steel itself is saying this is bad for the company, this is bad for employees, this is bad for our future, all this type of thing. There are myriads of national security concerns. A lot. There was an article in Bloomberg that said this is not how you treat allies, and we should trust the Japanese to, run U.S. Steel. That whole deal is definitely counter to the direction the Trump administration wants to go, and was even counter to the direction the Biden administration was going to go. Biden was a big union guy, obviously, and he he wanted, unions were concerned about what Japanese ownership would mean in terms of plant closures and cutbacks and all this type of thing. So as good an idea as it was, I'm not at all surprised that deal kind of fell apart. One of the other big stories that broke over the break was the rising prevalence of rape gangs in the UK. A new story broke BBC last week about this, where there had been rising reports of Pakistani gangs going around cities looking for young, usually non-Muslim women to rape, and they would do so in these large gangs. It has come out more and more, and it has kind of sparked a flurry of various and sundry. Anti-Islamic is a strong term, but that's what comes to mind. Sentiment in the UK with other footage and video of, Muslim people holding, assemblages and prayers in public spaces and all this sort of thing. And it kind of goes along with this whole idea that, we're losing Europe to a Muslim majority. And the term Londonistan has gotten thrown around a lot. And this kind of latest, wave of crime and this latest wave of issues has sort of brought that into further focus, which is yeah, that's a lot. There's no deny. I mean, it's very easy for, sort of pro immigration, pro open borders people to sort of dismiss it and poo poo it. The reality is a little bit more complex. The reality is these crimes do happen, and this isn't a UK thing either. These sorts of stories have come up in France, they've come up in Sweden, they've come elsewhere. This isn't just a UK problem. Um, and this isn't just something stoked up by Nigel Farage to hopefully get votes for the Reform Party in the UK. No, no, no. This is definitely a problem. The cultural ideas around women, sex, sexuality are very different. And the unfortunate reality is those are incompatible with Western values. Simple as. Now, we can talk about how to handle that. We don't need to go into the deport them all, very racist, or we don't need to go that road. But there's definitely something to be said for, yeah, this isn't okay. And this isn't a good thing. So we're gonna dive into more headlines. But that's kind of the stories I've been looking at and tracking. Obviously throughout, immigration's been a hot topic. One of the things I did finish over my break is my long-awaited big long-form article, America's Faustian Bargain with Immigration. And that will be coming out shortly. I need to edit it, but it's basically done being written. And kind of dive into this topic at a very deep level and talk about the history we have of immigration in this country. And we're going to be having that conversation actively as Trump takes power in 2 weeks. And how there are a lot of benefits, but there are also a lot of downsides. And I think one of the mistakes the pro immigration crowd makes is not really addressing the downsides. And in current online discourse, anyone who wants to talk about downsides is immediately branded as a racist. And that's not fair. There are downsides to mass immigration. There are. It's true. There are, and that was true when the immigrants were coming from Europe. There were downsides at the time. There were things sacrificed and given up, and that's part of the conversation. It's worth talking about. That's a discussion we should not run away from. That's okay. And I get into that deeply in the article. So let's dive into headlines. I hope everyone had a good holiday, by the way. My Christmas and New Year's were both very quiet, which was fine. I was mostly focused on resting and recovering because I have been in a lot of burnout, running two businesses and trying to finish books and expanding the Cameron Journal and bringing back the Newshour and all this sort of thing. It's been a lot. It's a lot to take on. It's a lot to do. I've been working on expanding my own personal brand and getting into the press more on top of everything at the Cameron Journal. And we have so many exciting stuff. We have a whole new series of articles on philosophy from Dan Sanderson that goes along with his new course, Reimagining Plato, which we will be launching shortly. Where I'm also launching all of my long articles from What the Hell is Going On, put together in a new collection called What the Hell is Going On, because that book is no longer in print, which means I can do with the content as I want to. Yay. So, and there's going to be a series of videos there with that as well. I have a lot of filming to do coming up, which is crazy, but we're going to do it. And then, so there's a lot of great new things happening with the Cameron Journal. If you are not signed up for the weekly newsletter that comes out every Saturday, head over to CameronJournal.com and sign up in the sidebar. Every Saturday, I do a newsletter that announces things from the Cameron Journal. I do kind of a wrap-up of that week's headlines, videos from the week, and it's all delivered right to you. No muss, no fuss, easy peasy. So that's all happening. That's all in progress. So it's going to be a great 2025. I have a lot of confidence in our ability to, move forward and make things happen. And it's going to be great. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's probably going to be a long year. But I think the attitude this time around, especially with Trump 2.0, is going to be very different than Trump 1.0. I think a lot of people are checking out. I think a lot of people are just going to try to get through their lives as best they can. But the reality is a lot of the problems that the Biden administration has are going to be plaguing Trump too. We still have a cost of living crisis. We still have all of these things going on. So, is it new year, new us? It's more like new year, same problems. At least that's the way I sort of see it. So let's dive into the headlines. Let's see here. Here we go. Oop, don't want to start there. Let's start with Canada. So today we got word that Justin Trudeau is stepping down as party leader and prime minister. He has led the country for nearly a decade, and he's announced on Monday that he would step down as Liberal Party leader and prime minister, and that will lead to new leadership in Canada by late March after his party picks a new head. And this is also sort of amidst back and forth with the U.S. about tariffs and also just sort of the ongoing immigration problems Canada's having. It's been a long 10 years of Liberal leadership under Trudeau, and it is now time to move on. And this has been happening all over the world, pretty much everywhere. I think the only people managing to hang on right now is Labour in the UK. Everywhere is going through this right now. There's definitely some names kind of already here. So the new leadership will come from within the Liberal Party until they call another election. So it's going to be one of these four folks. Melanie Jolly, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland. Oh, sorry, top from clockwise from top left. So Melanie Jolly, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, and Dominic LeBlanc. So those are the four people, according to the New York Times, that are most likely to take over as head of the Liberal Party and therefore Prime Minister of Canada because the Liberal Party holds the majority. Um, it says in Canada's political system, the leader of the Liberal Party, as the head of the largest party in the House of Commons, is also Prime Minister. When Mr. Trudeau's replacement as party leader is chosen, they will assume the position as well. That politician will take the party to general elections to face the Conservatives and their leader, Pierre Poilievre, who are dominating public opinion polls. Elections must be held no later than October, but the government, under its new Prime Minister, is expected to fall long before then through a vote in the House of Commons. Mr. Trudeau said the Liberal Party would choose his successor through a vote by its members, a relatively small portion of Canada's population. While no one has yet announced their candidacy to succeed Mr. Trudeau, there are some possible contenders, and we just went through those. So that's what's happening in Canada. Now, speaking of politics, let's bounce over here to Bloomberg. Oh, and I have not signed in on this browser. This is fine. It's okay. So, this was just kind of an interesting headline. Speaking of far right parties ascending pretty much everywhere. So, the Austrian far right leader Kickel gets a chance to form a government. Now, here's what's interesting: Austria has not had a government in months, almost a year, and this is basically the third attempt to form a government. And so the far right party has an opportunity, if they can unite the right parties in Austria, they may have a chance to form a government. Rumor has it that some of the conservative parties are not interested in forming an alliance with his party, so remains to be seen. But that's what happens in a multi-party democracy. I'll have to sign into Bloomberg on Chrome because I use this for the show. Oh well. Now this one, well, let's not do this first. Let's do this here. I was looking at this all day. So this was a scene from the certification of the presidential election, and it's lovely. You know, everybody's there. There was no violence, no issues. It says here lawmakers in Congress officially certified President-elect Donald J. Trump's election victory in a constitutionally mandated joint session on Monday, peacefully performing a basic ritual of democracy that was brutally disrupted 4 years ago by a violent pro-Trump mob inflamed by his lie about a stolen election. Mr. Trump told the radio host he planned to replace the head of the National Archives, the agency that raised alarms about his handling of presidential records. The current National Archivist was not involved in what became a criminal investigation and indictment into Mr. Trump's handling of classified documents, but a letter expressing concerns about his actions was written by your predecessor. A federal judge held Rudolph Giuliani, formerly Mr. Trump's personal lawyer, in contempt of court for failing to cooperate in the handover of $11 million of his personal assets to Georgia poll workers he falsely accused of helping to steal the 2020 election. So it was a big day. I think everyone was kind of waiting with a bit of bated breath, but nothing happened. It was very pro forma. There was no, big moments from it all. It was fine. People moved on. Again, before 2020, nobody even realized this was a thing. Like, it was one of those things that only those of us who were really into politics even knew it was a thing, or that its constitution required, or all this type of thing. It only has become kind of publicly known because of the 2021 incident. So, I want to, yes. Oh, this is the thread on the British gang situation. Let's jump into that. So, it's so this is kind of interesting. This is from Charlie Peters, and what did I want to? No, that's not what I wanted to do. And it says so this guy has been sort of covering this scandal sort of thing, and I thought there was more. I thought there was more to this, and there's not. Anyway, I've kind of already explained it. Oh, here it is. There we go. So reports started going as far back as the 70s, and then there was kind of another peak in 2003. I loosely remember that. Um, and so it kind of goes through the history. Um, this was kind of, interesting. It says in 2010 he heard a radio report, he meaning this guy, Andrew Norfolk at the Times, heard a radio report about a grooming gang in Manchester. He sorted through the archives and what he found was a pattern. Since 1997, there had been 17 cases in 13 towns where a group of men had approached a girl on the street and groomed her. Of the 56 convicted, 3 were white and 53 were Asian. 50 of those had Muslim names, most were Pakistani, but when he went to the authorities, they refused to talk. Bernados, the children's charity, told staff not to talk to him. At the time, it seemed like the only prominent people talking about this crisis were right-wing politicians and activists such as Tammy Robinson's EDL. The strategy of the groomers was to pose as a friend or a boyfriend. That's why we call them grooming gangs. They draw the girl into their social circle with gifts and attention. They'd offer them drugs and alcohol, and they'd abuse them. Threats were used against them or their family to control them, and then they'd be passed around the whole gang to abuse. What blew this open was the small town of Rotherham, with its decaying steelworks and beautiful medieval chapel. There, Andrew Norfolk met Jane Sr. She ran Risky Business, a youth project working with children at risk of exploitation. More and more of her work had come to involve abused girls. She was able to introduce Norfolk to victims and their families, but neither the journalist nor the whistleblower expected the scale of the scandal that would emerge. Yeah, and it goes on. There have been investigations in local councils. There was a national report in the Home Office. Um, and people, it's finally basically all coming out. And they kind of show in this map a lot of the Midlands, which is a very poor area, kind of like the Rust Belt of the UK. Um, and it is kind of all finally coming out now, including with threads like these. And it is, I think the part that frightens people, and this guy started his project in 2021, the part that frightens people is the fact that government officials, charities, and others, in order to not be called racist, have closed ranks on this story and not admitted, hey, we have a criminal problem with this particular group, and we should, I don't know, do something about it. That's the whole thing, the fact that it's happened is bad enough. Like, that should never happen to anyone. That's terrible enough. But then you can't get your own government to even admit that it's happening. That's so insulting at such a visceral level. It defies the imagination. I mean, it'd be like getting in a car accident and no one admitting that someone ran into you, sort of thing. Or even going through something, the most horrible moment of your life, and then wanting to talk about it, or want people wanting to investigate it, and everyone closing ranks and being like, well, that never happened. Or even worse yet, not that it never happened, we're not even going to talk to you about it because we're afraid of the implications of what we might say it might mean. It's inexcusable. I mean, I don't care what you think about immigration or racism or Islamophobia or whatever have you. It's inexcusable. I don't care if these girls are getting taken down by purple people eaters. We would need to go after purple people eaters. Simple as. This is not hard. This is not an issue. And the fact that this has gone on. I mean, again, the history of these grooming gangs in the UK goes back to 1997. There have been multiple reports in the last, checks notes, 28 years of this. The thread finishes with his investigation. And it says here that the years-long investigation shocked me to my core, not just at the scale of abuse or the way it had been covered up, but at the fact it was still going on. After all these years, what the victims were telling me was that the abuse hadn't ended. In some cases, it was actually getting worse, and in many cases, their rapists had been freed from jail after a few years. Imagine that, seeing your rapist walking the same streets as you. And some of them were organized. In some of the places I was followed, the streets were hostile. I'll never forget my first days of investigating and filming in parts of Telford, Rockdale, and Glodwick near Oldham, and it was generally a hostile environment. My small team stood out wherever we went. We were not welcome. We were often speeding out of some places after quickly filming what we needed. Our questions and our presence was not welcome. When we finally broadcast Grooming Gangs, Britain's Shame, I was relieved. It was a big project, and soon after, then Home Secretary Swilla Braverman announced a new task force to tackle grooming gangs, our key policy demand in the documentary story. It made hundreds of arrests in its first year, but the battle wasn't over yet. I knew there were far more victims out there whose tales needed to be told. I knew there were far too many rapists released on our streets. And I knew the far left and the Islamists would come for me, of course. They mostly just accused me of being a racist, the same accusation they deployed on everyone else who raised concerns. But this attack just doesn't work anymore. Anyone who wants to call me a racist in response to my reporting can pick a number, get in line, and kiss my arse. I don't care. I've done my homework. Your slander means nothing. Yeah. And that about sums it up, Charlie. Charlie said it better than I could. Absolutely. This is, yeah, the fact that people close ranks and won't even admit that it's a problem is beyond beyond the pale. It's so insulting to every victim, every person, especially women affected by this. It defies imagination. It really does. It absolutely 100% defies imagination, and I can't imagine um what these people, these women, these girls have gone through, and even what he did trying to report it, and everyone accusing it of racism. Absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. This is a really great thread. If you want to kind of read more into this, it's long. It's a long ass thread, but it's a good one. Now, let's turn our attention to this story. I found this one over the break on the Daily Caller. We'll do this right now because it's fun. So, people might know, let me catch up if you don't know. In the kind of wake of the Trump election and Elon buying Twitter and it becoming a not so fun place, Blue Sky has been launched as a new Twitter alternative, and a lot of liberal and left-leaning people have kind of fled Twitter for Blue Sky. Blue Sky is actually now more popular than Threads, with hundreds of millions of active daily users. And the Daily Caller accuses it of death threats and fake news. And it says here, left-wing social media users have been departing Twitter en masse for the new Blue Sky platform, with many of them lauding it as a kinder, gentler alternative unburdened by the presence of Elon Musk. Users of the new platform, however, are proving to be guilty of the very same behaviors they claim drove them from X in the first place. Blue Sky, initially created by Twitter founder Jack Dorsey as a decentralized evolution of his original creation, has evolved into a landing pad for dissenting liberals looking to protest Elon Musk after his 2022 acquisition of Twitter. A who's who of celebrity left-wing journalists, celebrities, and even whole news outlets, Don Lemon, Mark Hamill, and even The Guardian, have departed Twitter in favor of bluer skies. Users of the new platform left Twitter searching for an app free of perceived misinformation, extremism, and bigotry. Mueller, She Wrote, the username for a popular podcast hosted by Allison Gill, posted a conspiracy theory about Elon Musk and the recent drone sightings in New Jersey on the platform on December 15th. And it goes to the tweet, and despite this, Democratic New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Blue Sky's top user, decried both the rampant misinformation and the danger of using X, not Blue Sky. Recently took a peek at Twitter, and the disinformation is getting substantially more dangerous, she wrote Monday. Someone could get killed. The tactics of constantly repeating outright lies, targeting specific people, repurposing years-old footage, and presenting them as new is getting into another level. It's scary. However, a cursory perusal of Blue Sky shows that outside of rampant misinformation, the platform is also rife with violent threats against Republicans and their allies like Musk. One user appeared to say they wish they had killed Musk when they worked at Tesla. Thinking about how I met with Elon Musk on multiple occasions when I worked for him at Tesla, and how I could have prevented all this if I'd been as brave as Luigi, a user named Jordan posted, referring to the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson's alleged assassin Luigi Mangione. But the platform's users will even go as far as to threaten those who aren't right of center, like left-leaning journalist Jesse Singal, who had experienced so many death threats on the platform he wrote an article for the Free Press entitled Blue Sky Has a Death Threat Problem. Singal's perceived malfeasance is writing about sex change operations on children, a subject he's been covering for nearly a decade. He argues his reporting isn't far outside of the mainstream, but said he's become, quote, a symbol of bigotry and hatred to a group of activists and online trolls, unquote, because he started pushing back on the trans narrative earlier than most. We're not going to keep going into this. Obviously, this is the Daily Caller. We know what their perspective is. This is Shapiro and Company. Whatever. But I thought it was interesting. That's not been my experience on Blue Sky, but honestly, knowing how extreme some people on the far left can be, I'm not surprised. I haven't super started using Blue Sky. If you want to join me on Blue Sky, cameronjournal.bsky.social. But yeah, it was just kind of an interesting thing to read about and some different experiences and how, of course, the Daily Caller is going to denigrate sort of thing. It says here, horrifying what's happening on Blue Sky. Sociopaths have stirred up a massive smear campaign against journalist Jesse Singal. Hundreds of people are piling on with scurrilous allegations tonight, death threats and doxing. It's depressing. It's depressing. This is honestly, I mean, not to get into it, but honestly, one of my biggest frustrations with, like, especially far left types is that if you don't agree with them, you have a hard time talking to them. Now, I have a hard time talking to Republicans sometimes, and I have close friends who are conservative, and sometimes I'm just like, I'm not doing that today. I have to take a break. Like, I have to maintain my own mental sanity. But there's a certain amount of people who are on social media, they have a platform, they have some followers, whatever have you, but they're deeply unserious on engaging with topics and ideas, engaging with normal people, having a reasonable position, or even understanding why people are mad. One of the articles I also finished over the break is called "Don't Progressives Understand That We're Angry?" And it was a quote a reader sent me a long time ago. And I didn't know how to write about it for a long time, so it just kind of sat in my drafts for a long time, a couple years, I think. And there's definitely a certain din of just not wanting to hear other people's opinions and ideas that is definitely frustrating. Now, I'm not saying you need to expose yourself to stuff all day, every day. There are some stuff that comes out of conservative people's mouths that just drive me over the edge. And there are some times where I choose not to engage on certain topics or with certain people because it just becomes let's poke fun at the liberal guy because he, you're so dumb, you're liberal, and you get a little libtard stuff and all this type of thing. And yeah, I get this on Twitter. I mean, especially I get this on Twitter all the time, all this type of thing. It's incredibly annoying. Um, but it's it for me it's frustrating in that the far left immediately defaults to violence and doxing and smear campaign if you don't agree with a lockstep set of agendas. And if there's one thing I think people need to learn out of all of this is that you cannot play that game. Not all the time. You have to be willing to understand that people have different views and different perspectives and different ideas. And if you can't be at least somewhat open to hearing them out and then removing yourself from the conversation, if you just choose not want to, go with that anymore, then that I think that kind of makes them a bit unserious as well. Now, I'm not saying that if a Trump supporter comes along just wanting to dunk on people for the sake of dunking on people, that you should necessarily always engage with that person. I certainly don't. But I think being able to be open to listening and understanding other views, even if you disagree with them, is a vital part of a healthy democracy. And it's something that we have lost. And we definitely need to bring it back in a lot of different ways. So, spent more time on this story than I intended to. But, let's do this. So Democracy Docket, new publication I just heard about, really, really great. And this is an opinion piece entitled "We Are on Our Own" by Mark Elias. And he says, that this is the good bit. The we is the easy part. It includes all of us who care about democracy, rule of law, and free and fair elections. It is not a small group. It includes tens of millions who voted for Kamala Harris and millions more who did not. That includes millions who did not vote, as well as many who voted for Trump because they feel like government is failing them, and Trump seemed like change from the broken status quo. The hard part to define is how for certain is where we are. I know for certain where we are heading. We are sliding towards an illiberal democracy. The phrase, first popularized in the 1990s, took on new urgency in the United States as major figures in Donald Trump's orbit came to view Viktor Orban as a leadership role model. As Bill Kristol posted, ABC's settlement with Trump feels like it could be an inflection point in the Orbanization of our politics. While illiberal democracies have elected governments, they lack the guardrails to protect individual freedoms and rights. Things like rule of law, a free press, an independent judiciary, and professional civil service are viewed by those in power with hostility. The ruling leader amasses power personally rather than institutionally and uses it to reward friends and punish political enemies. To be clear, the United States is not yet a liberal democracy, but the movement towards it has accelerated in the weeks since the election. What is most disturbing is that Trump has not even yet taken power. This brings us to the toughest part, the fact that we are on our own. Institutions that assured us they would be in the fight for democracy are already backing down. People who claim they saw Trump clearly for what he is now have voluntarily put blinders in front of their own eyes. There is no segment of civil society that has been untouched by this capitulation. Some in positions of great power are preemptively acting powerless. Too many with the loudest microphones are turning them down. Most disturbing, those with the greatest wealth are acting like they are the poorest and most vulnerable. The guardrails of our democracy are not falling under violent contact. Rather, they're being taken down in advance by the very people who insisted that they be entrusted to build them. That's why I say we are on our own. When the legacy media normalizes Trump's most indefensible nominees at the same time its owners pay protection money, we are on our own. When businessmen fly their private jets to kiss the ring solely to protect their own companies from his deranged policies, we are on our own. When government officials, who know how dangerous he is, make excuses or resign in advance, we are on our own. I wish I could say I have the solution, but this is a bigger problem than one person can solve. I have previously written about the need to build new opposition grounded in winning elections and fighting Trumpism for the long term. I still believe that is a necessary part of the equation. So too is rallying around those institutions that are standing tall. Independent media, hi. Opposition, political figures, and non-profit and for-profit groups and businesses willing to risk themselves to support democracy. And when this article was interesting for me. So since the election, and you can see it in this show, I've been through a lot emotionally and psychologically since Trump won. I obviously was in favor of Kamala Harris winning. I definitely hoped Kamala Harris would win. You can watch me go through the 7 stages of grief on the My Election Live, if you so choose, sort of thing. And, my newsletter, I've talked about my disappointment in the election results. Know that when I say this. When I read this article, I actually, in a weird way, felt hope. And I know to some of my Kamala Harris voting, which is the bulk of you, most of my listeners are Kamala Harris people, I actually kind of felt some hope. Because, one, I'm feeling a little bit better about the election situation. I feel like a lot of what Trump wants to do is not going to get through. And it's going to be kind of like the first time where he says a lot of stuff and has no message discipline whatsoever, but very little of it actually ends up happening. But here's what is going to happen. More and more federal government power is going to get concentrated in the White House around him and a small team of loyalists. That is happening. That's already happening. That's Elon, that's Vivek, that's the H-1B visa thing, which I was not doing a show when that whole thing went down. We're not talking about it right now. But you can go catch my comments on Twitter about all that. And like I said, my new article on immigration is going to come out about our Faustian bargain with immigration. And so I mean, there are some things that are going to happen. A lot of it won't and don't. I do think Trump is stopping the more far-right Christian nationalist part of the GOP from really taking power, because Trump's not that guy. He was a Democrat for 35 years. Sort of thing. And so, but I do, in a weird way, this sort of more on our own thing, I think is a bit of a battle cry. I think it's going to give us a chance to reset, have a different conversation, figure some things out, figure out how to survive in a time of deeply conservative politics. And we've been here before. It's Nixon in 1968. It's Reagan in 1980. There's opportunity on the other side of this, and I think we have to get through it. Here's what I think is good about this. I think in Trump 1.0, a lot of Democrats were hoping, Oh, the people around him will stop him. The courts will stop him. The institutions will stop him. It was somebody else. No. This time, no one's coming to save us. We are on our own. But that also puts us in a great deal of power. That also puts us in a wonderful place to be able to get active, get off of social media, get off of Twitter, and go out and get engaged. And that can build a new political movement that is more powerful than MAGA. And so, in a weird way, I look at this as rather hopeful. Like, yeah, we're on our own. Okay. Subscribe at kevinjoel.com. He says support independent media, and I couldn't agree with him more. Get the newsletter, share the live, all this type of thing. I mean, that's where, I'm here. I'm going to be here to help you through all of this sort of thing. So, but the best way to do that is to help me grow. Not that this is about me, but the fact that we're on our own, it gives me a great deal of hope. And it's not that we're going to be okay. Like, everything's going to be okay. No, it's not. It's not. When people lose healthcare, people are going to die. That's coming. Get ready now. When the economy goes down in a handbasket because of tariffs, it's going to cause a recession and more inflation. Prices are going to go up. People are going to lose jobs. People are going to get divorced. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be fun. But we're the ones that have got to fix it. We're the ones that have got to come together. We're the ones that when people are losing jobs, can't afford to live, all this type of thing, need to come along and say, come in to our new movement, where we're going to take back the country, take back our democracy, and make sure government works to create a society that we can be proud of living in. That's what's on the other side of this. So it's a damn good thing we're on our own, because now we can work. Now that I've done that rant, fun times. Actually, this is a good follow-up. So what's this one? Oh yeah, this is the drones in New Jersey. We'll close on that. Oh, we got a ProPublica thing. Oh god, yes. Okay. We have so much to cover. It's been a long time. We're gonna go over. Okay, let's talk about the new era of politics, as it goes right with what I was just saying. So, this was from Christmas, Nate Cohn, and talking about whether we're in a realignment or new era of American politics. And the reason I brought this up is because I really agreed with a lot of what he said. Controversial, I know, because Nate Cohn is not popular, but it says here, long-standing areas of bipartisan consensus have suddenly become fiercely contested. Immigration, free trade, America's post-war alliances, and even America's support for democracy at home and abroad have all become defining conflicts between the two parties during the Trump era, rather than areas of agreement. Yet at the same time, the two parties seem to have reached a truce on the most bitter fights of the Bush-Obama era, like the war in Iraq, Social Security, and same-sex marriage. Much of the Republican Party's old establishment, like the Cheneys, the Romneys, Paul Ryan, is now without a home. At the same time, many former Obama supporters, from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to Elon Musk, suddenly find themselves near the center of the Trump world. The new partisan conflict has led to very different electoral coalitions. In 2016, Mr. Trump made enormous gains among white voters without a college degree, including in northern states where Republicans had not been able to sustain breakthroughs. Since then, he's made even larger gains among young Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters, and did so by representing everything Democrats thought these groups opposed. After 3 Trump elections, the partisan gap between white and non-white voters is now smaller than at any time since the enactment of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The partisan generation gap has fallen by 2/3. Perhaps most strikingly, the old class divide between rich and poor and capital and labor has seemingly vanished. The exit polls found Mr. Trump losing voters making over $100,000 a year, while winning among voters making less, including those making less than $50,000. If anything, 20th century fights are emerging as plausible areas of bipartisan consensus, with Republicans were seemingly receptive to labor and spending on infrastructure, while Democrats seem more open to deregulation and supply-side remedies to problems like housing and energy. In place of the old class conflict, there's a new educational divide. Before Mr. Trump, people voted about the same way with or without a degree. Now, the gap between voters with or without a degree is as large as the income gap was back in 2012, all the way back to the dawn of survey research. In some cases, Trump-era electoral shifts can be interpreted as an acceleration of longer-term trends. In other cases, they're new developments. Either way, these trends have brought American politics to a very different place. Whether all of this counts as a realignment depends on how one defines the term. A realignment usually means one party obtains a significant political advantage for decades. By this measure, the Trump elections plainly fall short. Republicans barely hold any meaningful advantage. Even if they do, it's not at all clear whether it will even last 4 years. Nonetheless, the Trump elections have two features of a realignment. They changed the basic political conflict between the two parties. They led to corresponding changes in the two coalitions. These changes aren't minor, and they're not just because of the singular force of Mr. Trump either. Like previous realignments, it's part of a broader political change occurring across Western democracies, where the remnants of the old industrial political order is being supplanted by something different. In country after country, the parties of the old industrial left, like Labour in Britain or the Socialists in France, have bled working class support to a new kind of conservative populism, driven by a new set of issues like immigration, trade, and national sovereignty. These issues don't fit on the old left-right ideological spectrum. In fact, many right-wing parties now embrace the welfare state. In each case, however, populist conservatives argue that elites have used democratic and transnational institutions to advance their own interests and causes at the expense of ordinary people. These political movements have thus far struggled to build lasting political majorities, but their critique has nonetheless been the most potent message in politics. The parties of the center left, on the other hand, increasingly depend on the support of a new class of affluent college graduates. These parties may still yearn to champion the working class, but this hasn't been their animating force for decades. Instead, they draw their energy from idealistic, college-educated progressive activists, whose cultural and economic views often alienate working class voters. Even when these parties do aim to help working class voters, their policies don't pack an electoral punch. Instead, their electoral fortunes depend on forming coalitions with classically liberal but traditional conservatives who oppose the populist right on trade, immigration, foreign policy, and democracy. And he goes on for a little bit, but that was the important bit. I think the age of the industrial right-left thing is probably on its way out. I think the divide is definitely going to be about, how would I phrase this? Gentry versus cosmopolitan? Does that make sense? Rural versus city versus rural? That sort of, those different cultural tradition versus progress sort of thing. And it will cross income sort of thing. Those I think are definitely the kind of the flags are moving right now, and it's, there's kind of the one side that is, lives urban, is educated, sort of thing, and lives exurban, rural, is not educated, sort of, and so the flags are moving. But I found this incredibly insightful from Nate Cohn. This is on the Tilt newsletter on the New York Times, and I thought, yes, we are in a new era of American politics. Populism is so dangerous, it's not even funny. But populism is definitely a thing. It's incredibly dangerous. I can't overstate how dangerous populism is. But that, I think, is the future, especially as people on the left demand more and more populist rhetoric, i.e. Bernie Sanders, to counter the right's populist rhetoric. And this manifests itself as, yeah, we shouldn't be in a part of a globalized economy, which I don't even know how we extricate ourselves from that. No, we need to have, get rid of these trade deals and, bring it home and make it here and all this sort of thing. I don't think anyone wants to deal with the decline in the standard of living required to do that, because everything is predicated on low-cost labor from Asia. But that's certainly the mood of the country right now. And I think that's where the new, facing outward versus facing inward, America first sort of thing happens. And it's very reminiscent of the 1920s. And in some degrees, we've elected our Calvin Coolidge in the form of Mr. Trump. Whether he'll go on to be a Mr. Hoover is another question altogether. But, okay, so 2 big things at the end. I want to get into this first before we get into the ProPublica thing about the militias. So, this is from Colin Rugg. He does this thing called Trending Politics. And according to him, Sam Shumate got an email from Matthew Livlisberger. He is the perpetrator of the Tesla Cybertruck explosion at Trump Tower in New Orleans. Now, we had 2 attacks recently, in case you hadn't heard. One in New Orleans was the exploding Cybertruck. And this guy has supposedly sent in an idea. Uh, so according to Little's before the explosion, he sent in this note saying that the drones were using gravitic propulsion, and it says here. Um, before I read this, I have not verified this. Neither has Colin Rugg. No one knows where this comes from. We're all believing Sam Shoemate. So, if this later comes out to all be a pile, I've said it here. Bear that in mind. Now, says here, what we've been seeing with the drones is an operational use of gravitic propulsion systems powered aircraft by most recently China and the East Coast, but throughout history. The US, only we in China have this capability, but our open location for this activity is in the box below. China has been launching them from the Atlantic from submarines for years, but this activity recently has picked up. As of now, it's just a show of force that they're using it similar to how they used the balloon for SIGINT, Signals Intelligence, and ISR, which are also part of the integrated comms system. There are dozens of those balloons in the air at any given time. The so what is because of the speed and stealth of these unmanned drones. They're the most dangerous threat to national security that has ever existed. They basically have an unlimited payload capacity and can park it over the White House if they wanted. It's checkmate. USG, US government, needs to give a history of this, how we are employing it and weaponizing it, how China is employing them and what the way forward is. China is poised to attack anywhere on the East Coast. I've been followed for a week now, likely from Homeland or FBI, and they're looking to move on me and are unlikely going to let me cross into Mexico, but won't because they know I'm armed and I have a massive VBIED. That would be the bomb he used. I've been trying to maintain a very visible profile and have kept my phone, and they're definitely digitally tracking me. I have knowledge of this program and also war crimes that were covered up during airstrikes in Nimruz province, Afghanistan in 2019 by the admin, DoD, DEA, and CIA. I conducted targeting for those strikes for over 125 buildings that killed hundreds of civilians in a single day. US FORA continued strikes after spotting civilians in the initial ISR and was supposed to take 6 minutes and scramble all aircraft in CENTCOM. The UN basically called these war crimes, but the administration made them disappear. I was part of that cover-up with US FORA and Agent blank name of the DEA, so I don't know if my abduction attempt is related to either. I worked with Jen Miller's 10 staff on this as well, and the response to Mala Brigade. He was commander at the time, so-and-so can validate this. You need to elevate this to the media so we can avoid a world war because this is a mutually assured destruction situation. For vetting, my LinkedIn was neither Matt Berg or Matthew Lewisberger, and active duty 18Z. Out of one time my profile is public, I have an active, yeah. So, and this was all talked about on this show, and people have talked about the fact that, it came from Proton Mail, and it could, be fake, and that's why I said, I think this is interesting, I think this is frightening, it could all be complete BS. Let's just say it, it could be. Let's just know that, and go from there. So let's just bear that in mind. But if any of this is true at all, this is a huge problem. Absolutely massive problem. And especially with someone who lives on the East Coast. Yikes. Huge issue, huge problem, super sucks. Yeah, was quite, when I came across this, it was genuinely quite frightening. So, yeah, Chinese drones potentially, and more balloons, and it's all connected to this explosion in NOLA. We live in weird times. Now, the last story I want to talk to, and I may... Oh, this is super long. We should not do this now, because it's almost been an hour. People get bored. We'll save it for next week. This is a really fascinating article about this guy who got into these undercover right-wing militia groups and reports on what they're all about. I have also been doing some of this reporting and looking into these things as years have gone by and sort of thing, and so it's always interesting. But we're not going to do that right now. That's a lot. It's a very long article. We'll lead next week with it. So, because it's been an hour and a bit, and people get bored and tired and all this sort of thing. So, My name is Cameron Cowan. Thank you so much for watching. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. If you want to keep up with me, head over to CameronJournal.com. All my links are there. It's Cameron Cowan on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, Cameron Journal on TikTok, Cameron Journal on Blue Sky. This happens every week. This week's interview is with the really great personal improvement and leadership guy, Alan Lazaros. So that interview is on the YouTube channel right now, and youtube.com/@CameronCowan if you're not watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Facebook or wherever else. So make sure to check out this week's interview. Make sure to head over to CameronJournal.com for the latest news, headlines, and commentary from me. Sign up for the newsletter. It comes out every Saturday, and it has lots of great info. It's a great way to end your week and start your weekend. So, my name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week, Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Talk soon now. Bye-bye.